Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the LBJ Library. It's good to see so many friends here, and it's a great privilege for me to have the opportunity to welcome a truly distinguished public servant who has many strong ties here to the University of Texas and to the LBJ School. As you know, Senator Hutchison is not only an alumna of the University of Texas and the UT Law School, but it's particularly fitting that we're hosting her here at the library. For those of you who traverse the fences and the work outside, because thanks to Senator Hutchison, she played the central role. The work that's going on outside that's going to bring this library to an even more fantastic standard is almost entirely due to her determination and efforts that have made this project possible, and it's going to be something that benefits the entire community. As you all know, this is just a great resource for all of us. And not only will we have a renewed plaza, but we'll have the Lady Bird Johnson Center as part of this project, which is especially meaningful to us at the LBJ School because we'll have classrooms that we can work with and new resources that mean a great deal. And I also want to extend Larry Temple's thanks on behalf of the LBJ Foundation. Senator, he would have given anything to be here, but Larry is also a great public servant, and he is meeting with the regents about the Brackenridge project as we speak. And so it's, he regrets that he could not be here, but I think we all understand that part of his service as well. In addition to those connections, Senator Hutchison played a critical role in the naming of the LBJ Department of Education, which we were all so honored to be part of that ceremony just a few months ago. It's really especially meaningful for those of us with the LBJ tradition because of the importance of President Johnson's role in education policy and the pioneering work that took place during that administration, and having one of our own Texans, Secretary Spellings, now at the Department of Education. Senator Hutchison is a leader in so many different aspects of public policy, it's hard to just categorize all of them. But especially close to my heart is the leadership that she's shown on national security issues. Her work and her leadership was recognized last year by the Association of the U.S. Army, which gave her their Distinguished Congressional Leadership Award, and it was one that was richly deserved. And her work on behalf not only of our active duty but of our veterans is something that is especially impressive and for which we are all grateful. Today's event is sponsored by our new Center for Politics and Governance, and our director, Ronnie Stidman, is over there. And the role of the center is dedicated to helping students, researchers, and practitioners develop innovative ways to make our political process work better for all citizens. And I can't think of anybody who embodies better that spirit of what we're trying to capture with our center than Senator Hutchison, who has demonstrated that it's possible to be both a successful politician and a civilized and thoughtful leader, who has led a very productive and really constructive discussion about the issues of our time, without the shouting and the name-calling which too often characterizes our political process. And as such, she really is a role model for future generations. And as we try to inspire young students here at the LBJ School, I can think of no one else to hold up as an example of how you can pursue a productive and really valued career as a public servant. And although she's going to be unhappy for me saying, her other great connection, of course, is that she's a scholar. And she has now produced her third book, I think it is. And it is really a reflection of the fact that she understands the importance of reflecting on history and experience and sharing that with others that's captured in the book that she's here to talk about today. So, Senator Hutchison, thank you for your service, for your support of the LBJ School and of UT, and for coming here today.
Thank you. Thanks so much, John. Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. First of all, I really do appreciate it, and I love working with the LBJ School and the library. I feel like I am the senator for the LBJ School, and I have to say that I had this sort of running battle with Larry Faulkner when he was president of UT, because he was the conservative leader of the university and thereby wanted to have all of the money, the federal money, in hand before he turned the dirt on the plaza outside. And I am the practical politician and kept saying, Larry, turn dirt. I can get you money when it's already started. I promise it will be there. And so we finally, as he was leaving office, he finally started the project, and it made it much easier to finish getting the money for it. So we had this battle of the true leader, as he should be, conservative with the university dollars, and the practical politician who kept saying, I promise, if you build it, it will come. So we had a great time, and I love working with the Johnson family, I have to say. Lady Bird Johnson was just incredible, and I want to talk a little bit more about her because she's in the book. But in my first book that was called American Heroines, that profiled women who were the barrier breakers in different fields, I had a presentation and a book signing at the library, and she was there. She came, and I thought it was so magnanimous of her because she had already had her stroke, and she came, and she was an incredible person that we all love, but I just especially revered, and so I thank you, and it's a great honor for you to call me a scholar. You know, I won't say which universities, but 2 universities have contacted me almost. I think the search committee representatives were apologetic, but they called and they said, now your name is on the list for the president of the university. I won't tell you which ones so as not to embarrass them, but I told both of them, I laughed when they called, and I said, you know, at least I'm in a politics that I understand. Academic politics is much worse, but I don't understand it. So I would take myself off those lists. Let me say that this is a book, it's my second book about women who have broken barriers. And my first book was so much fun because I took politics and sports and business leaders, the women who broke barriers in journalism, and I interviewed the contemporary women who were breaking barriers and the first women in history who did. But many people wrote me letters, or if I was on an interview show, they would call in and they would say, well, why not the military? Well, where were the suffragettes? Well, what about civil rights? Well, so, you know, I got another book out of the suggestions. It was really wonderful. And many of those suggestions are incorporated in Leading Ladies. In this book, I took the military, which I thought would be a very small chapter because, after all, the first woman general was named in 1970, and I thought, well, there won't be very much here. Oh my gosh, was I wrong. The military chapter is so interesting, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. But I also did a chapter on the suffragettes. I did civil rights leaders. I did the first women in science, the first women to win the Nobel Prize in science, the first women to go to medical school, the women who won the Nobel Prize in peace, for peace, the woman Jane Addams who started Hull House, which was our first settlement house in our country that just transformed immigration, the treatment of immigrants in our country, and the immigrants who came and her enlightenment of and by them. And then I did a chapter on women who have been forged as leaders from tragedy. And I want to talk a little bit about that as well, and then I want to take questions. I also did a chapter on our first ladies, because I think the first ladies of our country have such a special place. Most of these were women who never sought the limelight, never thought they would be in the limelight, and yet when they were, each one has shown such an individuality and has made such a mark on our country. So I want to go through a few of these chapters, but I want to start because I think Texas women are very special. And I think that Texas women have a spirit that was forged from our historic background. And I want to read a quote from Thomas Rusk. Now, Our first two senators from Texas were Sam Houston and Thomas Rusk. They were great friends and allies. Thomas Rusk was the Secretary of War for the war against Mexico for Texas independence, and of course Sam Houston, we remember, was the Commander-in-Chief. But Thomas Rusk was the more quiet one, and he was the Secretary of War. He was at the Battle of San Jacinto. Many people encouraged Thomas Rusk to take over from Sam Houston because, if you remember Texas history, Sam Houston kept retreating back from the Goliad and coming back, and the men were ready to fight. And so there was a kind of a almost an uprising among the troops. But Thomas Rusk stuck with Sam Houston. He said, no, he is the general. He knows when the time is right. And he kept the mutiny from happening. And Thomas Rusk he was a wonderful writer as well. And a lot of what we know about the war and the Republic and early Texas history is from his diaries. So I wanted to read a quote from his diary. When he was from Nacogdoches, as was my great-great-grandfather, Charles S. Taylor, they two were friends and business partners. And Thomas Rusk knew that the women were leaving Nacogdoches and going east to Louisiana because the Indians had been harassing the women, and there was also a fear that the Mexican army was going to go east as well and prey on the women who were left, while the men were signing the Texas Declaration of Independence, fighting at the Alamo, and then also going with Sam Houston wherever he was going to go, which ended up in the Battle of San Jacinto near Houston. But Thomas Rusk wrote this about the women who were left in Nacogdoches and their contribution. He said, all the men had left the town of Nacogdoches to join the fight. The women and children were left behind, not sure if the Mexican army or the Indians might attack. He wrote in his diary, "The men of Texas deserved much credit, but more was due the women. Armed men facing a foe could not but be brave," he wrote. But the women, with their little children around them, without means of defense or power to resist, faced danger and death with unflinching courage. Now, my great-great-grandmother was one of those who took her 4 little children, aged 7 and under, in what was called the Runaway Scrape. Her name was Anna Mary Taylor. Mary Rusk was Thomas Rusk's wife, and she too was in the Runaway Scrape, and they were going toward Louisiana. Just to imprint this spirit of Texas women, my grandmother lost all 4 of her children. She was my great-great-grandmother. All 4 of her children, aged 7 and under, were lost because of the disease, and it was cold and it was miserable, and they were very susceptible to disease. But of course, she came back to Nacogdoches after the Battle of San Jacinto and had 9 more children. This was 1836, remember. So when I think of some of the obstacles we've faced, I just always know that we have all come from this great stock. The chapter on the military, one of my favorites, I thought would start with about 1950, because our women nurses have been in all of our wars, and they have been so brave. And they have a special place in the history of our military and in the Army. And I sort of thought that's where we would start. Oh no. Women fought in the Revolutionary War in the late 1700s. Many women dressed as men and went to volunteer. And they either went with their husbands, or sometimes they just went because they were patriotic, and they dressed as men. And from the very few diaries that we had back then that we could uncover, the men, if they suspected many times they would protect the women because they admired them and they wrote well of them. There was even a woman who had a baby. She was dressed in military uniform, carried a baby to term, and the men showed a great respect. There was a man who wrote in his diary that they thought she was a quite wonderful military person, even though she'd just had a baby. And there was a woman, the first woman to be buried at West Point was named Margaret Corbin. She went with her husband. He was a gunner, meaning he was manning a cannon. He was killed early in his conflict, and she took over the cannon. And she was injured. She was captured by the British, and she was finally released, of course. They found out that she was a woman, but she was the first woman to win a military pension, and Congress gave her this military pension in the late 1700s, and she was also buried at West Point, and she has a very special place at West Point. Virginia Hall. She was known as probably she was one of the greatest spies of World War II, and she was the greatest woman spy for sure. There was a flyer put out all over France, and it said, "The woman who limps is one of the most dangerous Allied agents in France. We must find and destroy her." Well, Virginia Hall she was born in the United States and always wanted to be in the Foreign Service. She went to the Sorbonne. She went to Radcliffe and the Sorbonne. She spoke fluent German, French, and Italian. She was in France and actually failed the exam for the Foreign Service, but she went to France, and on a hunting trip in Turkey, she accidentally shot herself in the leg, but she couldn't get to a doctor, got gangrene, and had to have her leg amputated just below the knee. That's hence the limp. They had a rule that you couldn't be hired by the Foreign Service if you had an artificial limb. So she was not able to be hired by the American forces, but she got into the British Foreign Service, and she was immediately deployed to France and became a part of the British spy operation, and she became a part of the French resistance. She was very helpful in the French resistance because she spoke German and French. She disguised herself as a French cheesemonger, and she would go through the marketplace and listen to what the German soldiers were saying, and she would report all of this back to the French resistance and to the British intelligence operation. She was so valuable that they put this flyer out because they knew that she was there, but they could not find her. The Germans never uncovered Virginia Hall, and she did incredible things, like she pinpointed places for the British to drop the food and the information to the resistance in France, because of course she knew where it was safe. She reported where the German soldiers were. She reported when they were changing their military headquarters, the Germans. And she also participated in capturing Germans with other members of the French resistance. And she was just an incredible patriot. She's the only American woman who has ever received the Distinguished Service Cross from the United States Army. It is the second highest military honor from the American Army, and she also received a ceremony from Jacques Chirac of France, the highest civilian honor that France can give, and the same thing for from the British Empire, the Order of the British Empire. She was just an incredible person and retired, mandatory retirement at the age of 60 from the American Foreign Service, where she finally got a job. And she retired in Montgomery County, Maryland, and lived out her years in Maryland very quietly. So she made a huge contribution. The first woman general was in 1970. Her name was Anna Mae Hayes. And she was the head of the Army Nurse Corps. Back to the fact that the Army nurses have a revered place in the United States Army, and they wanted to make the first woman general from the Army Nurse Corps, and she was the head of the Army Nurse Corps. But she never got the official notification through the official channels. Anna Mae Hayes was called by a news reporter in 1970 to ask for her comment on being the first woman general. And she said, "Oh, really?" She had not been told. But she was, of course, very pleased to be the first. And she said, "It really came home to me," in my interview with her, she said, "It really came home to me when I was in the beauty parlor at Fort Myers. And the Army Chief of Staff, William Westmoreland, who had been a strong supporter of Anna Mae being the first general, his wife, Kitsy, was in the beauty parlor. And Kitsy said, 'Anna, I hope you get married again.' And Anna, who was a widow, said, 'Why?' And she said, 'Because I want some man to know what it's like to be married to a general.'" So I just was taken with the military chapter. Now, I did a chapter on the First Ladies because I so respect what they have given to our country. And I have always said, you know, George Washington set the pace that we would not have royalty. He didn't want a fancy inauguration as the first president because he wanted to set the precedent that we were not royalty, that we are a democratic society. And yet, America has always looked up to our first family as the representatives of our country. And our first ladies, though they didn't seek that spotlight, have been such an important part of our country. Lady Bird Johnson was just one of the best. She took over probably in one of the hardest acts to follow, Jacqueline Kennedy, and at a time when our country was grieving. And she had just the graciousness to allow Jacqueline Kennedy to be the star for a while, to let her lead the grieving of our country for her late husband. She purposely did not take a public role in the months following the Kennedy assassination so that she would not steal the limelight from Jacqueline Kennedy. And she consulted with Mrs. Kennedy about the historic preservation that Mrs. Kennedy did with the White House, and was very deferential to her, as was President Johnson. But then, when she came into her own, oh my gosh, the imprint that she has made on America with the beautification, with Head Start, her adoption of those two areas in our country have really made a huge difference. I will never drive on a highway in Texas with the fabulous wildflowers that I don't think Lady Bird is here. She just had that wonderful cause that probably nobody thought about, beautifying our highways, and yet it's just made such a difference in our landscape. And of course, the Wildflower Center that she created is now a part of the University of Texas. I thought, of course, Laura Bush and Barbara Bush, our other Texas First Ladies. Now, Barbara, of course, has a place in history as one of the only two in our American history who is both the wife of a president and the mother of a president. And that takes, quite, I think, a place in our history, because you have to be pretty special to not only be married to a president, but to bring up a person who could be president of our country. And she did that, and her cause was literacy. And I especially admire Barbara Bush because she took on adult literacy. Those who were embarrassed to say that they couldn't read, she made a place for them in our country by promoting literacy, even adult literacy. Laura Bush, what she has done for our state and transported to America, the book festivals. I was so fortunate to participate last week in the Texas Book Festival, which I just think is a treasure for our state. It's in its 12th year. She started it, and of course, Laura, kind of giggles behind the scenes saying, oh yes, I created this because that's where I really wanted to go. I wanted to go and sit for 2 days and listen to the authors. And she kind of says, well, maybe it is considered a gift, but it was really something I just wanted to do. Because, of course, she is probably our best read First Lady. And I just admire what she's done so much, and she's taken it national. And under the auspices of the Library of Congress, now we have a National Book Festival there were probably 100,000 people at the National Book Festival this year. I went just to walk around and see the different tents and the authors in the tents on the mall in Washington. And Laura Bush has a breakfast for the authors the same morning, that Saturday morning. And there's a dinner the night before that also has the authors, and she really celebrates the authors. And I just think that what she has done with the National Book Festival is that's going to be her legacy. I did a chapter, as I said, on civil rights. And of course, Barbara Jordan, a former professor right here at the LBJ School, is a part of that. And Barbara Jordan, well, Rosa Parks is also in it, but I knew Barbara Jordan, and so I loved having her in the book because she was such a respected leader in the United States Congress. I knew her better when I was a news reporter in the state capitol and she was in the state senate. I thought what she did in our state senate was really incredible. When she came into the state senate, Dorsey Hardiman, who was an old-time rural state senator, thought that she just was going to be kind of a rabble-rouser that would only have the causes of an African-American leader and that she probably wouldn't be effective. He was blown away by Barbara Jordan and became her mentor because he could see that she wanted to be effective for Texas, effective for her district, and that she was going to play by the rules that were there. She wasn't going to try to change the rules. And so he adopted her, took her under his wing, and helped her become effective. Now I see Ben Barnes back there, and Ben Barnes was Lieutenant Governor when Barbara Jordan were you there when she was first starting, or was Bill Hobby?
No, I was there for 4 years, and the president was there for the first 2 years.
Right. So you saw her operate, and she was an operator. And I learned something from Barbara Jordan that helped me when I was elected to the State House of Representatives the same year that she was elected to Congress. I learned how to fit in from Barbara Jordan because she understood that you could make a deal and that you could win things for your cause or your district by making a deal. And I never have forgotten listening to her tell another member of the state senate that she was for what he was trying to do, but she was not going to support it right now because she had given her word to another state senator that she would not let the other bill go that she did support until he got what he wanted, and she was going to get something in return for that, after which she would support that cause. I thought that was masterful. And she got everything she wanted. She got the first cause and the second cause by playing by the rules. So I loved writing about her, and I think she's made a huge print on Texas as well as America. Now, I have to say, when I think of what I have overcome in discrimination, I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm maybe at a 4. The women in science and medicine are a 10. Oh my gosh, Gertie Corey, the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Science. I loved the chapter on our Nobel laureates because they did not have the education opportunities. They couldn't get into the good research programs. They had to blast their way in through their brilliance. Now, Gertie Corey was born in 1896. She was born in Czechoslovakia. She came to America with her husband, having met him in medical school in Czechoslovakia, where they were a little more progressive than they were in America. But they also had the anti-Semitism that grew up in Europe in the 1929, 28, and then as it was growing, the Coreys both decided that they had to leave Czechoslovakia, and they were looking for someplace outside of Europe. And her husband, Carl, got an opportunity in New York, in Buffalo, New York, and took the opportunity to come over with his appointment. Gertie, who was his collaborator and his equal in education, could not even get an appointment as a lab assistant. But she and Carl continued to collaborate anyway. And they started in 1929 in Europe and then continued through the 30s with their joint research papers. And they were very equal. Whoever did the most research did the paper. Carl kept getting university offers to be the chairman of departments from Cornell, from Rochester University, from Toronto, but there was always a stipulation that Gertie could not be a part of the faculty where he was being offered the chairmanship of the department. So he kept turning down the offers until Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, offered him a chairmanship of the department, and they did allow Gertie to be a research assistant. So she made 10% of his salary, and she was able to have a lab. They discovered the metabolism of sugar in the body, which led to the treatment of diabetes. That was their area of research. Gertie Corey got her first full professorship the year she won the Nobel Prize in 1947. And she was the first American woman to win the Nobel Prize in Science. The only other two women were Marie Curie, of course, and Marie Curie's daughter also had won the Nobel Prize in Science. But Gertie Corey was the first American woman, and she was a naturalized American. The first American-born woman was 30 years later, Rosalind Yellow. And she won the Nobel Prize 30 years later, the first American-born woman. But I loved this chapter. The first American woman to get a medical degree was Elizabeth Blackwell. Now, Elizabeth Blackwell was born in England, but she came to America very quickly. And she applied to many medical schools, and they thought it was what they all turned her down, except the Geneva Medical College, which thought that it was a joke. They thought that her application had been put forward by one of the rival medical schools in the area, and so they thought it was so funny that they put it to a vote of the student body of the medical school. Should we accept this woman, who they thought was fictitious? And so they all voted yes. So she shows up at Geneva Medical College in 1847, And there was, she wrote in her diary, there was hysteria because they did not really believe that it was an application and that she would actually come. But they let her stay, and she became the first woman to win a medical degree in America 4 years after she entered the Geneva Medical College. And it was still another 2 decades before they allowed women into medical schools in America. But some of the women in medical school had not even had the ability to go to the right colleges to have the prerequisites to go into medical school, because there was such a bar to women getting into these schools. My chapter on, my last chapter is Women Forged Through Tragedy. Dianne Feinstein is one of my colleagues in the United States Senate. Dianne had won a position as president of the Board of Supervisors in the San Francisco, which was kind of their city council. And she had served for 12 years. She ran for mayor twice, in 1971 and 1975, both times against incumbent mayors of San Francisco, and she lost. Then she went through her husband's cancer, and he died in 1978, and she was just tired. So the morning of November 27th, 1978, Dianne had a press conference and announced that she was retiring from public life. 2 years later, Dianne Feinstein was the acting mayor of San Francisco. San Francisco had 2 tragedies that happened within 1 week of each other in November of 1978. The first one was, you remember the cult that Jim Jones had in Guyana. It was a Jim Jones temple, People's Temple, and he had 913 people. It was based in San Francisco, but it was in Africa. And there were reports, and parents had prevailed on a congressman, Leo Ryan, to go over there because they felt that their children were being brainwashed in this cult. He went over there in November of 1978, the congressman did, and there was this mass murder-suicide. Every one of the people in that cult died in this murder-suicide, and the congressman was also killed. 1 week later, Dianne made her announcement that morning that she was leaving public office, and this deranged former member of the Board of Supervisors came in and assassinated the mayor and another member of the Board of Supervisors. And Dianne heard the shots. She was in her office, heard the shots, ran next door. The mayor died in her arms, and she, 2 hours later, stood up and had a press conference to try to begin the process of healing San Francisco from these 2 terrible tragedies. And she did a wonderful job. And she served as mayor for 11 years, obviously being reelected. And Dianne is a particular friend of mine, I have to say. We just are really good friends. She is a wonderful person and a very independent person in the Senate, and I think very respected. Mary Bono is another woman, and she's the last one that I'll tell you about. Mary Bono is a congresswoman also from California. Mary Bono was a very kind of unprepossessing, very nice person who happened to catch the eye of Sonny Bono of the Sonny and Cher team. And they got married, and Sonny decided to run for Congress. He was actually, after he retired from singing, he became a restaurant owner, a business person, thought there were too many regulations and wanted to do something about it. And so he ran for Congress. And so he and Mary got married. She was the stay-at-home mom. They had 2 children. And they were skiing during the Christmas break, and Sonny ran into a tree and was killed almost instantly. Mary was there with him. As a matter of fact, she told me that their children were skiing as well, and she just tried to get the kids down the hill not knowing what had happened because she didn't want them to see Sonny laying there, but she was there with him. And after he was killed, Mary called Cher, who was in London, and asked Cher if she would come home and be a part of the eulogy in his memorial service, which Cher did. Now, Sonny and Cher had been very estranged. They were not friendly. But Mary, I thought, did one of the most magnanimous things I've ever seen, and it was to sort of step back and let Cher, the star, be in the spotlight. And that's exactly what happened. And Cher flew home, got a charter plane, flew home from London, and stayed at Mary's house for the week before the memorial service and gave a wonderful eulogy of Sonny. But I asked Mary why she let Cher come and do something so big and public, and she said, because I wanted there to be a public reconciliation between Sonny and Cher. I thought it was important for Sonny. And I also wanted there to be a good relationship with Chastity, their child, and our children. I thought, my gosh, that was so big of her in her time of tragedy to do something so important for Sonny. But it was a beautiful service, and Cher did a magnificent job. And then Mary was asked to run for the seat, and though she had never done anything at all political, she decided to run. And Sonny's mother campaigned and did an ad against Mary. I just thought, oh my gosh, all this stress that she was already under and that, but Mary handled it beautifully. She never said a word about Sonny's mother, never a recrimination, nothing. She just kept right on going, was handily elected, and has been reelected 5 times. So I just really admire her, and I like her a lot. She's now engaged to Connie Mack, who is the grandson of Connie Mack, the baseball player, and also my colleague, Connie Mack, who was a senator representing Florida, and now Connie Mack, the third, is a congressman from Florida, and he and Mary are engaged, and they are the third couple who have met in Congress from different districts who have gotten married, who will be getting married, and it's, you know, pretty rare, but they have been going together ever since Connie came to Congress about 3 years ago, and so I'm very happy for them. So those are some of the women that I profiled. It was so much fun to learn about them. I'll just end with one other story, a factoid that I learned that I didn't know. And that is Julia Child, who is one of our favorite all-time television chefs. I did not know that she was enlisted in World War II because we had mines out in the ocean to blow up German U-boats. But the sharks were running into the mines, and they were blowing up, and they were then deactivated for the German U-boats. So they called Julia Child and said, can you give us a shark repellent recipe to protect our mines from the sharks so that they can be left for the German U-boats? And she did. And it worked. So I thought that was a great little factoid of her contribution to World War II. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'll be happy to take a few questions before we do our book signing. Well, thank you, if there are any. Yes.
I have a question. You mentioned some of the surprises your research yielded. Was there any story in particular that you found resonated with you personally in your own leadership experiences?
Well, I think overriding my observation, overriding all of the people in this book and in American Heroines, is that perseverance is the quality that every woman has who has made an enormous contribution to our country, because they weren't given the accolades. They weren't even given the encouragement. But they won that accolade through their own perseverance and their own belief in what they were doing. Generally, they were not seeking the limelight. Most of the women in both of my books were just trying to do something they loved, the research or doing the good job for the Hull House. I mean, Jane Addams never intended to go for the Nobel Prize, but she won it because of what she wanted to do for the poor immigrants in our country. So what I learned is that so many women had it much harder than I did, and they persevered, they had a great attitude, and they were able to accomplish something that has made our country great. The other thing that I have to say, traveling in the new emerging countries of the world, it is so clear that the countries that have brought women into society are the countries that have excelled. The European countries, America. Women weren't given every right in America. They earned it, but they were made equals from the very beginning. Women were treated well in our society from its very earliest moments. When even during the revolutionary times, women were running the stores. They were earning money on the farms when the men were writing the Constitution and trying to form government. And so there was an equality about women in our country, and I know it has made a real contribution to the fact that our country is the greatest country on earth. But when I go and see countries where women are suppressed, Afghanistan, Iraq, the Middle Eastern countries, you see that those are also the countries that have very low economies, and freedom is very limited, and it's only for selected people. And those societies have suffered, not just the women in the society, but all of the society. The men in the society also have suffered because of the oppression of women. Yes?
Your passion for this industry was so loud. How long did you work on it?
Wayne, thank you. 3 years on this book, and probably 2 years on the one before, because, you know, I do have another job. But I took my time, and I had a wonderful researcher who helped me, and we kind of went over what I wanted to do, and then he did a lot of the research on the early women, and he uncovered some of the factoids like Julia Child and Josephine Baker, who was a singer during World War II, who transmitted messages for the Allies in invisible ink in her sheet music. You know, just little things like that that were just so much fun to learn. Thank you. Yes, both of you, one at a time.
What did the women in your book say about the men in their lives?
Great question. It varies. There were some women who were happily married, who were traditional wives, as well as great writers. For instance, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Elizabeth Cady Stanton was a traditional wife and mom, but also a rabble-rouser for women's suffrage. Pearl Buck, by the way, another writer who made such an imprint on our country, her first language was not English. She was born in Pennsylvania, but her first language was Chinese. So she really showed the culture of China to the world that had not really known much about the culture of China. But to your question, it was mixed. Some never got married. and some it was not a factor in their lives, but some were quite happily married and had great relationships with their fathers. Many of the women in this book were educated because their fathers thought they should be educated, which was not the rule of the day, but they were. Catherine the Great, by the way, was another woman. I mean, I always have done American women, but her father gave her such a great education that it allowed her the greatness that she became. But the other thing that's interesting is the men were so respectful in many ways of the women who were doing the pushing the envelope for change. And the women that made it in medicine did have male mentors who saw the brilliance and brought them along. So they did get some encouragement there. Even though society didn't encourage them, they would have many times a male figure who would. And that's important because I will tell you, I have been so affected by traveling in Middle Eastern countries where the women are invisible and just treated terribly and not allowed to participate in society, be teachers or get the education. And I'm so affected by the damper that puts on the whole society that I do believe that even though it took time, men had a major role in bringing women in a very positive way. Yes?
As women continue to break barriers, what sort of changes do you think we need to see in our workplace and our sort of societal values in order to allow women to sort of take their rightful place in public life while at the same time keeping families very strong?
Yes, that's a good question, and we've come so far. We really have made it so much better and easier for women to excel, to hold public office, to become chairman of corporations, major corporations. But here's where I would say we need to continue to go and do somewhat better. We need to give women the leeway to have children and raise their children, but still be participants in society. We've done much in that regard, but we have not gone as far as we need to go to fully utilize women who also want to have children and good marriages and regular lives. The CEO of PepsiCo several years ago retired because she just was worried about not being able to spend quite enough time with her children. Now she's come back into the workforce after a couple of years, but she should be able to do that and excel as well. Ruth Simmons is one of the women I interviewed for my first book. She's the first African-American woman to lead an Ivy League college. She's the president of Brown University. She's in this book as a cameo, but she was a major interview in my first book. She's in this book because Barbara Jordan was her inspiration. And she said that she walked by the house that Barbara Jordan grew up in the 5th Ward in Houston every day. And she said to herself every day, if Barbara Jordan could get out of here, I know I can too. Now she grew up going to the same high school in the 5th Ward that Barbara Jordan did, but and she went to an historically black college as well. Barbara Jordan did, and so did Ruth Simmons. And I am a real believer in historically black colleges to this day because I know that the nurturing that can be given can bring out the greatness. And it did for both Ruth Simmons and Barbara Jordan, because Ruth Simmons then went on to Harvard and majored in linguistics. But Ruth Simmons, the reason I'm saying this is because she is an example. she followed her husband around for the first 15 years of their marriage. He had the career. He was a professor, and he had the career, and she was the mom. She thought that she was never going to be able to fulfill her dreams of really being an academic leader. But after the period that she spent with her children, she was able then to start in her career path, and of course she immediately shot to the top. And she said, if I had only known that the road to success is a circuitous route, I wouldn't have worried so much that I was getting behind. Because as she gained experience, she found that other people also had other parts of their lives, and then they were able to concentrate on their own careers, and they were able to become successful. So I think we have to make it possible for women to be successful while they are also raising families. And the other thing I'll just say quickly is we've got to equalize pensions for women, because women going in and out of the workforce don't have the same pension opportunities for their retirement security that people who stay in the workforce have because of the compound interest. One of the things I've done in Congress, because I experienced this myself, was pass homemaker IRAs, because I wanted women to be able to contribute the same amount to an IRA whether they had a job outside the home or not, so that they would have a better shot at pension equity. We have since also allowed women and men over 50 to have more capability to set aside in an IRA. You have a bonus after age 50 that you can put in your retirement. Mainly it is for women who have been outside the workplace to catch up. But there are now men who are staying home and raising children, and they deserve this as well, because they're in the same situation. So those are some of the areas where I still think we have a way to go.
That's all the time we have for questions, Senator. We can answer more in the back while signing.
Okay.
Well,
Thank
let me
you.
ask everybody to join me. Thank you. That was terrific. Really magnificent performance, and thank you for all of it.